What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. I've got a modern video for you today. This is a deck profile on Enduring Ideal. Generally considered like a tier 2 or kind of fringe strategy in modern. It's still one of my favorite decks to play. It's doing something really unique and quite fun. I like to optimize it and keep working on it, so I'm going to share my latest build of the list with you today. But there's still a few cards, a few slots that I'm not sure about. And I'd like some viewer feedback on those, so let's get into it. The list that I think I showed in the previous video, or at least the list that I've been playing for a while recently for Enduring Ideal, of course, is the best spell. It's your win condition, you need to play 4 to find it reliably. Some people only play 3, but 4 I think is pretty good. 4 Leyline of Sanctity. Just protect your hand from discard and protect yourself from burn spells, all of those good things. 4 Lotus Bloom, just to help you get to the 7 mana to help cast your big spell. 4 on Thin Ice, so Devotion Source plus really efficient removal. Great card for the deck. 4 Ruined Halo. Again, it's just one of the best defensive options. 2 mana, 2 devotion is a very efficient rate. Protects you from Valakut or Death Shadow or various things. Very flexible defensive option. Then slightly unorthodox choice, maybe. 4 Wall of Omens, that's been in the deck for a while. New card, 4 Scourge of the Skyclaves, and the 4 Astral Drift. So, Astral Drift by itself, actually quite a reasonable card. You can blink opponent's creature for 1 turn and draw a card, so it's like a sort of cantrip fog in a way that's a bit like a remand effect, kind of just like delaying your opponent for a bit, replacing itself, so you can just take the time to get the suspend counters off your Lotus Bloom and make land drops, so you can play your big finisher spell and win the game. So it's obviously good for that. Some creatures are better than blinking when you target them with this. Like if you hit a Walking Ballista, it just kills it, for example. If you hit a token, it just kills it as well, things like that. Pretty flexible, and of course you can target your own creatures as well, so Wall of Omens to draw another card, or Skyclave Apparition to blink something, to exile something. Very flexible, strong option in the list, I think. And of course the Skyclave Apparition on its own, great card, like Oblivion Ring, that gives you 2 devotion, pretty solid. And then Wall of Omens, of course, gives you devotion, draw a card, no problem. So of course with these creatures in the list, I don't want to play Porphyry Nodes. If you want to see my legacy deck with Porphyry Nodes, you can check out my previous video. But for this list, I don't think it's the right card at all. And then for the Enduring Ideal quote-unquote toolbox, 1 Overwhelming Splendor, 1 Form of the Dragon, 1 Dovescape, 1 Phyrexian Unlife, and 1 Sphere of Safety. So, in the most recent version of the deck, I don't know if that I did a video on that, or if my latest video on this list was even more older than Skyclave Apparition. So these were all the spells I was playing. So I don't play the Solemnity combo, with Solemnity and 9 lives. I think that's too inconsistent. You're like a mono white deck with no library manipulation. If you draw 2 Solemnities, that's very bad because it's redundant, it doesn't do anything in multiples. If you draw only half the combo, that's not very good. Compared to Ruined Halo, if you have a 9 lives and your opponent just can hit you with 2 creatures for a few turns, or even 1 creature, for 9 turns, because your deck is so slow, and you'd die to it, whereas if you had Ruined Halo, you would be fine. I don't want to have to rely on a 2-card combo to protect myself in a deck with no library manipulation, and makes the deck more vulnerable to like Abrupt Decay and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't think that's very good at all. But you need to have one Phyrexian Unlife to Enduring Ideal for it in situations when you're dead on board, and then Form of the Dragon comboing with it is very strong. Dovescape pretty much auto-include, everyone knows what that does. Overwhelming Splendor, some people don't like it. They think it's like win more or unnecessary, but when you disable creature abilities and spells, it means you don't have to play like a greater Auramancer effect, because this basically stops all forms of enchantment removal, and then this card on its own is a very impactful first thing to search. Like imagine you're being attacked for a lot against a deck that's playing like Reclamation Sage effects. For example, if your opponent's playing like Amulet, is a good example. Like you play this, and then it disables their Primeval Titan, their Engineered Explosives, their Reclamation Sage, like all of that. Like it becomes very, very difficult for them to deal with this. They basically have to have exactly like their one or Force of Vigor or like their Beast Within or whatever. Whereas like otherwise you have to get like this to protect yourself first, and then follow that up and like try and assemble this whole Rube Goldberg machine. Whereas when you have Overwhelming Splendor in the list, like it protects itself by making all the creatures just 1/1s, so that's very hard for them to kill you with it. And then it protects your enchantments by disabling all their abilities. Like it's just a very impactful thing to have as an option. And then it's not even that hard to cast, right? Like it's only 1 more mana than Enduring Ideal anyway. Often you just top deck it and you have enough devotion to put it on your opponent like hard cast. So it's not even that bad as a one of. Yep. So that's the and this one Sphere of Safety I think is just nice as a kind of like emergency option when you're facing down different combinations of like threats from the opponent. Like if your opponent has First Strike guys or something like that, then sometimes Phyrexian Unlife isn't going to do the job, or maybe your opponent's playing Infect. It's like some weird situation like that. Sphere of Safety is just comes up in enough situations that I think it's worth having a one of, and kind of like Overwhelming Splendor, like it's pretty reasonable just to cast it when you draw it because it only costs 5 mana, so it's not that bad to have in the deck anyway. Yep, so that's the spells. So apart from possibly the Skyclave Apparition, because I don't know if that was in the video, in the deck the last time I made a video, the list is basically exactly the same. This will be replacing like Nevermore maybe, or like I can't remember what card I was using before, but yeah, that's basically it. So you might be thinking like, what is the big innovation that's happened to justify making another video on it? And that is that I'm now playing Yorion in the deck, making it 80 cards. So the reason why I think this is really good, the first reason is that we've added another good thing to blink with it. So before the deck basically only had the Wall of Omens as a good Yorion target. Now you have the Skyclave Apparition as well, and of course with the extra 20 cards that you have to include to enable Yorion, you can have even more good blink targets as well. So with the Skyclave and the Yorion, the Skyclave and the Wall of Omens, well, the Wall of Omens was there before, so particularly the Skyclave, we now have maybe enough blink targets to justify playing the Yorion. The other good thing about Yorion is that it gives you like a consistent threat to have access to. A big problem that this deck has is it often kind of like controls or like soft locks the game quite nicely. Like you have all this removal, like your Skyclave and your Ruined Halo and your Thin Ice and stuff. So you get to like a quite stable situation when you have the 7 mana or whatever, and you're just thinking like, okay, let me top deck an Ideal now. But because the deck doesn't really have that much card draw or cantrips, effects like this, very, very often you get into games where like the game is quite stable and you're waiting for an Enduring Ideal, but you just can't find one. Then your opponent will just top deck a random creature or like a Planeswalker or something, and you don't have the right answer for it, and it just slowly kills you while you thought you were going to win and you just drew badly. So in those kind of games, being able to have like a 4/5 reliably, which not only can be like a decent game-ending threat by itself, it's a pretty big creature. Like it flickers your Wall of Omens to help you draw towards your Enduring Ideal, help you stabilize the game even more by Skyclaving your opponent's creatures, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, so I think it's a good in that sense. The other thing is that sometimes you get flooded because you have Lotus Bloom, and the only real expensive thing to spend it on is the Enduring Ideal. And like I said before, you don't have such good library manipulation to reliably draw these things together. So if you are able to spend your Lotus Bloom to instead accelerate your Yorion out, it makes your Lotus Blooms a bit stronger as well. And the other nice thing is that Yorion is like a really good Astral Drift target. So of course you use Astral Drift to blink your Yorion, and then it blinks all your other stuff when it comes back. So it's like you Astral Drift as many targets as you want on your side of the battlefield, basically. So that's a nice upside as well of playing Yorion. You might think the downside is that like because you're quite reliant on winning by drawing Enduring Ideal, that the extra 20 cards diluting the deck is bad, and yes, that's something to consider. But I think having access to the Yorion itself makes up for that. The other thing is that like diluting your deck is quite good because you have all these like awkward one-offs that you often don't really want to draw. So it sort of like might balance out a bit in that sense. So yeah, I think it's a pretty reasonable thing to include. And another fringe thing is that like if you top deck Dovescape, hard casting it becomes a lot more reasonable when you have Yorion in the deck, because it's just like a huge creature that doesn't get countered by it. So it lets you far more reliably win the game if you ever get stuck in a spot where you top deck your Dovescape and you want to hard cast it. So that's quite nice as well. So yeah, so after all of that, the question then is what spells or cards are we putting in the deck to bring up the extra 20 cards so that we can have 80 to play Yorion? And that is the more difficult question to answer. So to keep the ratio roughly the same, I'm adding 8 lands to the deck and 12 spells. So for the lands, previously what I was playing was the 4 Nykthos, the 1 Hall of Heliod, 1 Arch of Orazca, 1 Mistveil Plains, 4 Temple of Triumph, like the red-white Scryland, and then I think, how many lands is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, I was playing 23 lands total, so I think 12 Snow Plains. So separately to the Yorion issue, I've cut the temples for Field of Ruins. I think having the extra untapped mana is probably maybe better than the Scry. I mean, obviously it's close, but the extra help in the Troll matchup I think is quite relevant. So that's what I'm trying for now, but you could change those back to temples if you wanted. I didn't really want to cut plains for this because you want to have the early mana for your Thin Ice and your Rune Hello. So instead of the temples, I have Field of Ruins now. That's not related to the Yorion build in particular, but it's just something to point out. So yeah, so that I had that before, and the like 12 planes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I said I was going to play 8 more lands. And again, because you need early snow mana for Thin Ice and you want double white on turn 2 for Rune Halo, it's pretty limited as the extra cards you could play. So I moved the Boseiju to the main deck as 1 extra utility land. And then I just added 7 more planes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's 31 lands in total. Pretty straightforward. Then the spells. So another card that has really significantly made Yorion a lot more viable, I think, is Rune of Sustenance. So what this does, it's a new card from Kaldheim. 1 and a white enchantment Aura Rune. Rune doesn't really mean anything, so it's an Aura enchant permanent. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. If enchanted permanent is a creature, it has lifelink. If enchanted permanent is the equipment has equipped creature has lifelink. So that part doesn't matter, obviously, because we're not playing any equipment. So even though it only does something if it enchants a creature or an equipment, it is allowed to enchant any permanent. So on turn 2, if you don't control anything except lands, you can just pay 2 mana and enchant your planes and draw a card. Then later in the game, when you're playing Yorion, you blink any of these, and then they come back, and then you draw another card. And if you do that, you can also put the rune onto your Yorion, and then you have a 4/5 lifelink Exalted Angel, basically, which can be pretty big in terms of stabilizing the game or turning the corner when you're playing against aggro deck or burn or things like that. So yeah, that's a pretty important thing, I think, to have the extra. Not only is it like a cantrip source of devotion, like Wall of Omens is, but it is a very good combo with Yorion as well. So that's what I would say is like an auto include if you want to play Yorion in the deck. Then the more difficult question is what the next 8 spells are, because there's no obviously good Yorion enablers left. Like Astrolabe's banned. There's not really other good white cantrips. Like I don't really want to play like Thraben Inspector. I think that's a little bit too underpowered. It's definitely an option, but I don't think it's that great. Then what do we play? So the first cards I'm adding are 4 copies of Path to Exile. So I have 2 full art ones, 1 Modern Masters one, and a proxy one. So obviously this is like a very staple white card in Modern. I wasn't playing it in the deck before. The reason for that was I thought the deck already had enough removal in terms of the Thin Ice and the Rune Halo and everything. So it was just worse than the other options. Like it doesn't give you a devotion, so it's worse than an enchantment in that sense. The other thing is that because the deck is so slow and it doesn't have didn't have good ways to stabilize in the mid game before, often when you gave your opponent an extra land, they were able to abuse that quite a lot, more than you could take advantage of the extra time that you gained by efficiently removing their creature. Like if you can remove their guy with a path, and like in that time window you use that to like clear the board, so you can like cryptic counter their spell, draw a card, or resolve like a 5 mana Teferi or something, then it's very worth, right? Because you recover that disadvantage and you start getting ahead. Whereas with this deck before, you would just like path their creature and then wait. So then once they started using their like Lurist and stuff, they quickly like snowballed ahead. So you would just like stem the bleeding temporarily, but then they would just come back and hit you like even stronger. Whereas now with this build of the list, you have the Yorion to function in that role. So if you just delay your opponent a little bit, then that's the time that you need to like summon the Yorion from your sideboard and then play it, and then you like draw extra cards or you exile another one of their threats or something like that. So you recover the card disadvantage and you like turn the game around. You take advantage of the efficiency of having Path as removal. So I think the Path is like a decent choice, and you have more creatures in the list now. Like if you want, you can path your own Skyclave to find a land, or so that's a good option to have as well. So that's the first 4 spells, and then the last 4 spells are the where I'm stuck. So there's a few different options. The first configuration that I thought about trying was, let me find it. One Heliod, 1 Elspeth Conquers Death, and 2 copies of Search for Glory. So this is a little bit weird. Search for Glory, definitely not a card that you would consider modern playable most of the time, but we do have a lot of snow lands, so we're usually gaining 2 or 3 life when we're casting this. So it recovers the tempo loss a little bit with the life gain, and you do have quite a lot of good options to find with it. So not only does it get on thin ice, obviously, because it's a snow enchantment, if you have to answer something very urgently, you also have the ECD as like a value removal. You have like a big threat that can like take over the game, and it also finds lands. So not only snow lands, if you really desperately need another white source for some reason, it can search for plains, but it also finds the legendary lands. So you get Boseiju, you get Hall of Heliod, and you also get, importantly, Nykthos as well. So the amount of utility you get from this card is quite high. But the question is, maybe is it still too slow? 3 mana for a tutor is a lot, and the amount of the options you can get with it are not that great. Like it would be really good if there was like a Wrath of God effect you could find with this, but I don't think one exists, or like a moat / a humility thing, like something that answers a board of creatures very effectively. I don't think that exists as an option with Search for Glory, so that's a little bit awkward. The other thing is that Heliod is not particularly a card that I really want to play in the main deck. Yes, it can be quite good as a win condition, but because it costs so much mana to get going, like 4 mana per token, usually only good in situations where you're sort of winning already. So it's not necessarily a card I want to play in the main deck so much, but then if you do cut that from in the main deck, then Search for Glory not being able to find a card when you do want to finish a little bit awkward. If it only gets like Elspeth Conquers Death as the like top end option, then that's kind of disappointing. So yeah, so this config is like decent, but not super exciting, I think. So yeah, so that's one option. The other option is just to play some combination of like Thraben Inspectors or just like generic value stuff. Again, I think Thraben Inspector is too inefficient, like mana wise. I don't want to have to pay 3 mana in total just to draw a card and get 1 devotion, and then if you blink it with like Astral Drift and Yorion and stuff, you have to pay the mana again to keep cracking the clues. I don't think that's very good. Knight of the White Awkward, something like that. You're not always going to reliably trigger it. You don't get a lot of mileage out of it attacking with the 2/2 creature, so that's not really ideal either. Ranger Captain of Eos might be quite nice, because the silence effect is pretty good when you're trying to resolve your 7 mana spell against blue decks, but the problem is that you have no 1-drop that you really want to search for, so that's not great either. So what other options are there? One card that I do want to try at least, and I think might be quite good, is Skybind. So I don't have a copy of that here to show you, but it's a 5 mana enchantment, 3 white, has the constellation keyword, so whenever itself or another enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you exile target non-enchantment permanent, and then return that to the battlefield at the end of the turn. So the reason why that is cool is because it forms a loop with Yorion. So you play the Skybind down. Just imagine this is the Skybind. It triggers itself because it's an enchantment when it enters. You exile your Yorion. Yorion gets exiled. At the end of the turn, your Yorion comes back. And then Yorion can blink however many permanents you want. All of your Wall of Omens and blah blah blah. Then, including the Skybind, then at the end of that turn, the Skybind and everything else comes back. Not only do you trigger the Skybind itself to target the Yorion again, all of your Wall of Omens, etc. triggers, and any other enchantments that came back also trigger the Skybind. So if you want to exile your illusion tokens from your Skyclave Apparition or anything like that, you can do that, and then every turn it just keeps going and going and going. So it lets you very quickly like snowball at an advantage. And just the Skybind on its own, even if your Yorion has already been killed or whatever, just as like a value thing to blink your Skyclaves and your Wall of Omens, I think it might be not the worst. Obviously 5 mana Cloud Shift is not ideal, but at least it gives you 2 devotion, and yeah, so that's one option. Then the other choice is just maybe some more cards to help with Yorion. So Auramancer is like semi-okay. The problem with a card like Auramancer is that you don't have really enchantments that put themselves in the graveyard easily. Obviously Astral Drift is the best one, and it forms like a draw engine with Auramancer. You cycle this on the targeting the Auramancer, you draw a card from this, then your Auramancer comes back, you return the Astral Drift. So it's like a mini draw engine, but because you don't really have enchantments that put themselves in the graveyard, then maybe Auramancer is not the right call. Other good options to blink with Yorion, I like Cavalier of Dawn. I think that's a reasonable card. I'm a little bit careful of playing too many 5-drops, especially when you already have Yorion as a 5. But the Enter the Battlefield effect is quite good. And that's another thing that you can use with Skybind as well. Similar idea to Cavalier of Dawn. You could play Archon of Sun's Grace. It's also quite a decent combo with Yorion. You just make a bunch of Pegasus and try and turn the game around that way. Serra the Benevolent is, I mean, okay. The emblem's not bad actually, if you can get that off versus aggressive things. And if you blink this, it lets you make another angel, so not the worst, but not super exciting either. Yeah, I think that's probably about everything I've considered. Baffling End maybe is not terrible, but I don't think the deck needs it. You already have enough removal, probably. I mean, even if you didn't want to play Search for Glory or Heliod, you could still play at ECD. Yeah, so you could play like Skybind, ECD, and like 2 Cavalier of Dawns or something, because we're looking for those last like four cards. I don't think there's any like generic mono white spell that's good enough. Yeah, I think like you sort of have to start looking at those kind of like mid-range Haymaker cards around the 4 to 5 mana range, because yeah, just to sort of help the Yorion be a bit more synergistic. The other option instead is to play like some of the disruption that the deck has played in the past. like Nevermore or Gideon's Intervention. That would be another reasonable choice. Probably just one copy, or yeah, I suppose you could play like 4 Nevermores if you're being really extreme, but you'd probably want to have like a specific reason. And the kind of decks that Nevermore was good against are a little bit worse now because of the Simian Spirit Guide ban. So like the combo stuff where you wanted to name like one key spell, those decks don't exist so much anymore. And like the sideboard is just like generic stuff. So I have 4 Generous Gift, 4 Mana Tithe, 4 Grand Abolisher. That's 12, and then you have the 1 Yorion on the board as well, so that's 13. And then you have 2 more sideboard slots. So I have a rest in peace here, but that's pretty flexible, I think. Yeah, I just like playing. So Grand Abolisher, I think, is the best anti-counterspell card. Better than like Silence, for example, because it gives you the devotion and it can't be force of negation. It lets you attack your opponents like Tefiris and Narsets in the early game. So pretty solid choice, the Grand Abolisher. And then I just like playing the Mana Tithes and the Generous Gift, because there's like a lot of different strategies where your defensive stuff is not very good. Like if you're playing against Control or Tron, then Path, not great. Ruined Halo, not that good. Leyline doesn't really do anything. So in these kind of matchups, you just want to have like some generic interaction that can basically interact with anything. So counter any spell, destroy any permanent has a lot of utility. If you want, you can pick stuff that's like more specific. You know, like if you decided that you just really only want to beat like Control and Tron, and you think there's like some targeted mono white card that can do that reliably, then you can play that instead. But I don't really think such an option exists. So yeah, so that's basically the list. So yeah, again, just to reiterate what I would like your help with, what do you think those last 4 slots of the deck should be? Do you think they should be like mid-range kind of finisher cards that are good with the Yorion? What do you think of the Search for Glory idea? Is that decent? Would you rather play cheaper stuff? Is there some kind of like a removal spell that you think is pretty solid? Yeah, or like the Disruption, like the Nevermore, things like that. Yeah, what would your pick be for those last 4 cards? That's your challenge for today. This has been Li-Fi TCG signing out.